It's Tuesday today, isn't it? Tuesday, May 6, 2025, and this is a policy committee meeting of West Penn Joint School District Number 1. I'm just going to pause for a moment to ask Superintendent Wimmer to confirm this meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Great, thank you. Let's rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we're going to welcome, I'm going to say interim member, but also I'm going to assume permanent member, Joe Pickler. Welcome to the Policy Committee.
Thank you, Chris.
And I believe we may expect a few other of our members. Superintendent Wimmer, we're kind of in that zone where we've got a new board member, we've got reorganization. I know at the last meeting, we talked about this Policy Committee meeting upcoming and kind of got permission to expand it for this meeting, but maybe you can just give us a quick overview there of next steps.
So our policy committee meets quarterly at this point, or if something needs our attention. So we seated our newest board members and returning board members at our last regular board meeting, and then we formalize our committee structures and those pieces. So we had an interim discussion, and the board provided their consent for the team to be seated for this last official meeting of the year, and then the new team, which is welcoming Joe Pickler as well as Chris Jenkins, will then kind of look at our calendar, select some dates, and then project those dates for quarterly meetings for policy. So it was advantageous that we had this one on the calendar and that they could join us.
Absolutely. And just a matter of discussion too, this is to use the word again, a discussion committee, so we don't really take action. It's more collecting thoughts for sharing with the board. And so I think we're perfectly comfortable here moving forward with Mr. Pickler and myself, and we may expect one or two members, but we're good to go.
I'll walk us through. So we generally take 3 series a year, again, to keep on that cycle of renewal for policy. And then you'll see a couple policies that might require interim attention or things that we're talking about. So for tonight, we have had previous discussions with our full board around, and our committee around use of facilities, around transportation eligibility, that 119, the high school configuration. New tonight is that big overview of the 600 series, which relates to fiscal management. And then I'll just be giving you an update. There's some policy requirements around the Act 20 literacy. So I'll walk you through those pieces. For our public and those who are new, you can go log in to our website and find the agenda, and it goes through everything that we're talking about, directs you to those policies or those drafts.
Excellent. Appreciate the overview. Well, then why don't we dive in? Our first discussion item is Policy 830, Use of Facilities. And I know we had talked a little bit about this before, so I'll turn it over to administration for presentation.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'll take this one. So this is something that we brought both to the committee and the board as discussed. And so this is our combobulation of all the different feedback from the board conversation, our committee feedback also, in looking at a way to reduce the number of groups that we have tagged in our system when facilities are rented. Currently, we have a large amount of groups. So we literally have 8 groupings of people who can rent our facilities. And that is the gamut from our groups here as West Bend School District, so our athletics, our co-curriculars, our band, our theater, et cetera, all the way out to the furthest is considered other groups, which is often businesses outside the West Bend School District community. When I say district, I'm talking our district boundaries at that point in time. That makes it very difficult to manage who is in what group, and the way the current policy is written is groups can slide into different groupings depending upon the case they made. So it's not as black and white as to where you would fit if you came in and you were looking at our website today in our policy. With that, we also wanted to make sure that our fees that are tied to them are accurate, and to make sure that we are only passing on initial cost or actual costs. And so talking with our policy committee last time, talking about, there's the cost for the lights, there's the cost for the heating and ventilation. There's also a staff time in there of letting people in, cleaning up the building and so forth, that goes with these different groups. And so what I did is I took all the feedback, made some comparisons to other places, and what you see in front of you is a updated version of our current policy. So the green being the add, the red being what we would delete from it.
Can I just hold?
Yep.
There are about 1 million kind of lingering attachments there. Can you just?
Yep. You are looking, yep, I will get you the correct one here. Just let me get to the right page. You are looking at 830 use of facilities regulations draft, and then the 830 AR fee schedule draft are the two that we'll reference. The other ones are ones that we've used before.
So the very bottom two in
Yep,
that
bottom
lineup?
two in mine, at least.
If you're
Thank you.
Following along, it's the last two.
Thank you.
Yep. And so our goal after hearing the committee was find a way to bring our groups smaller. And so there was a lot of conversation around 3 or 4 groups, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Making sure that costs to outside users who are not West Bend School District groups are identified appropriately, both from staffing and from electrical use and so forth. And looking at some way to priority book. Prior to this, there was no priority booking that, other than the language that says, yep, the school district has the first right of use for their facilities. There was no, hey, we are going to open up for the West Bend School District groups on December 1st. And then the next group on December 15th, and the next group on January. And so that's something that when we looked at other groupings and other policies, that was recommended out there. So that basically what we want is we want to get all of our stuff on the calendar. So when I open it up, I'm not calling Joe and Chris and Jen and saying, hey, by the way, now 3 months later, I have to kick you out because, oops, we forgot to put something on the calendar. And so you'll see reference that we will be posting items on our website yearly about close dates, our regular facility bookings, and a calendar of when those bookings open up. And then what we did is we took the goal here and we actually condensed down to 3 groups that you see existing today. Group 1, which is the first group in there, is a group that existed today, which is a West Bend School District group. This is our group, this is our activities here that are sponsored by the West Bend School District.
Just as people orient themselves to this language, we always utilize a markup format when we're looking at policy. So all the language that you see in front of you, if it's unchanged, it is in existence in the current policy. If it's green, it's additional language. If it's in red and strike through, we recommend removal. So in policy, we always try and ground it in what the current version looks like. So as we make those updates, we're kind of matching it along the way.
So that group 1, as you can see there, we just redefined as a West Bend School District group, which means anything sponsored by us and then provides examples. With each grouping, there is a fee and a staff charge that go with it. And so not all of the time do we have to have a staff member at an event, so we don't want to charge a staffing fee at that point in time. So for our internal groups here, we certainly are not charging for us to have our own music concert in the auditorium, our own gym, those different types of things. That's in our staffing plan that we already work at that point in time. Then when you can see, we removed a whole bunch of what this committee talked about is really our group 2. And if you scroll down, group 2 now is any West Bend School District community group. And that is anybody who exists within our West Bend School District. It's a business, it's a nonprofit, it's an organization that intends to use our facilities that exist within or are located within the West Bend School District boundaries. And then there's examples from churches and parks and recs and theater groups and community music groups, businesses. We have some condo associations, youth sports teams, community youth groups, et cetera, that use our facilities on a regular basis. With that then comes the designation of Group 2 for a fee, and you'll see that on the AR, and then also a staff charge that goes with that. And then Group 3, if you go down, which was the original Group 8 as we condense this, is anybody who exists outside of our West Bend School District boundaries. The best example I can give you recently is a couple months ago, we had a dance company out of, I think, Northern Illinois, Southern Wisconsin, host a dance event in our auditorium here for the weekend. They came here and brought dance groups from all over Northern Illinois and Southern Wisconsin and rented our facilities. So they don't exist within our West Bend School District boundaries, so they would sit in Group 3 at that point in time. So those are the changes as to how the groupings are laid out in terms of what the policy looks like. Then I would have you reference that we then changed the fee schedule also to go with that. And that is that other Word document that is attached there. And basically, Group 1 is our groups. We would charge no fees for that. Group 2 and then Group 3 have delineated fees tied to if you are a West Bend School District community group versus I am outside of the West Bend School District boundaries. Before I go into individual fees and talk about that, any feedback or questions on the groupings? There were conversations around, should we have 3 groups? And really what the a fourth group, and what the fourth group was, a delineation between nonprofit groups in West Bend is what I heard, and for-profit businesses in the West Bend School District boundaries.
Others, I've got one quick question. I think the purpose really, I'll start with consolidating this it was confusing, the first one, that you could have a group, like you said earlier, fall into various categories. But I think in my mind, one of the primary purposes of that was to have a good, clear delineation of the order of priority when scheduling. So I guess I'm going to turn this back to you from administration to see, based on this, are you thinking from that perspective, it's something that would be of benefit to the district? It adds greater clarity and it helps, because we'll talk about the fees in a moment, but I think
Yeah,
that was the
I mean,
one
I
item.
think- I think for the most part, what people have asked for is our internal staff just want access to the calendar before we open it up to the public. For the most part, they don't, honestly, Chris, they don't care if it's West Bend Mutual or, like, I know Chris is involved in theater, or a FIMA football coach. They don't care who they just want first dibs. Then we typically get into the biggest feedback loop we get is, well, I'm part of the West Bend School District. We should get priority before that dance studio, for example. So I don't know from a standpoint of priority, it's a big enough issue. Our goal would be, at least to say with these 3 tiers, is, for example, our current belief is we would open up internally like by December 1 for us. Outside group 2 would be right after the winter break, in early January, and then group 3 shortly after at that point in time. It really gets down to more the fees and how much we've delineated. If we would go to a 4 grouping, we would open them in order also and just expand that length of time. But I would say majority of our people are going to sit in group 1 and 2 that we have use our facilities here.
It certainly seems easier to explain. We start with school internal, so to speak, and then in the district, out of the district.
And we
So
used to
I
do
applaud that.
some things, like I'll admit, our auditorium is one where, in our sports fields, actually, our athletic fields are the ones where people will call and say, well, I want to book for 2 years out because I want to host this and that. I will openly admit places like our auditorium, and I've talked to numerous theater groups, I would just love to get the same people who always, we're trying to get that regular schedule, that you're always regularly coming back, so you know your big rock. So we ask every year, are we going to change the middle school musical dates? Are we going to change this? Are we going to change that way in advance before we go out there? But we want to put that out even earlier, and if we get before December, that would even be better, even for our planning purposes, because that gets into staffing, summer cleaning, project work that we do for capital maintenance and so forth.
Other questions?
I think,
Chris,
I
go
think you answered my question. I appreciate that you took out the favoritism of some groups, and, made it more inclusive, right, to everybody else. But then in group 3, I just want to make sure I understand the difference. Let's see. So you said any nonprofit or for-profit use organization not within the West Bend School District. So it's not that I qualify to be in group 2 because I may touch and impact kids through my program. It's that my location that I'm doing, that I'm operating in, is literally in the West Bend School District, correct?
Yes.
So if
That-
I put on a show that didn't have, that has a whole adult cast, that doesn't matter, I'm centered in West Bend.
Yep.
So I should still be 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Unless the board feels.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you guys want
that's
to
what I
change
tried
it, yep.
understood.
And we were trying to delineate, because then, like, years ago, they used to say, well, if it was kids, 50% of your kids were in West Bend, then we give
That's
you a
why I brought
50%
that up.
discount on that portion of the, I don't want to get in it. It's, the boundary is where we're at today. We can certainly look at other ways to quantify that. It works easier when you have kids involved, where if it's fully adult groups, then do I ask their location where people live? And that's
Yep.
all information that's easy to fudge one way or the other.
I gotcha.
I'll just comment, I do like the simplification, going to fewer groups. Last night watched the last policy committee meeting again, just to remind myself everything that was discussed. And yeah, 8 groups seemed like a lot to manage. So I think this is a move in the right direction. And I tend to agree that we don't need to delineate between for-profit or nonprofit. I mean, nonprofits, have other advantages tax-wise and everything. So I don't think we need to cut them a special deal.
Well, and I think also, and I know we'll have more discussion here, But this is now a speak now or forever hold your peace, right? I think this is a great improvement. If it turns out we try this for a year and there are some kinks that need to be worked out, well, then we'll talk about it again. But I think that's a good foundation.
Then I'll talk a little bit about fees and how that's delineated. So one of the things we talked heavily at the last policy committee is basically not funding other people's fees to use our facilities. There's staff time, there's lighting, there's HVAC and so forth that are not West Bend School District sponsored groups. That's everything from theater groups and music groups who come into the auditorium. It is sports teams who use our fields and our athletic facilities, the pool, to using classrooms. I mean, we do it. We have a condo association who meets quarterly up at the high school in the cafeteria, a variety of different users. So you see the 3 tiers here, and what we tried working with the facilities department as we reviewed something is there's the cost of the facility and then there's a staff charge. At minimum, it's always the cost of the facility, but often there's a staff charge that goes with it. And so we wanted to delineate that out because that does flex based upon the day you use the building. If I have to have Mr. Jenkins come in and he covers a Thursday night event for us here, that is straight time and not overtime for us here. If I have to bring him in on a Sunday to cover an event at Silverbrook, that is double time for us. And so you'll see a scale across that in the staff charges down on the bottom that delineate the different days that go with it. What we tried to do is get down to some real costs of use of the facility and some wear and tear. So you'll see some adjustments. These numbers that they're coming from, groups 6, 7, and 8, were basically your for-profit businesses and outside of the district groups. We did not charge for many of the community to use our facilities at that point in time. So that's why you would see those typically higher than where you are there. But what we've done is kind of standardized it that, our little gyms are $10 for a group 2 per hour. For an outside group, it's $20 an hour. When you get to a bigger gym space like Green Tree and McLean, there's some more amenities there to that facility. And again, as we look at our facilities and as we reshuffle some things around here in 2027 and beyond, we probably will have to come back and visit this. There's some different amenities there that you have access to from scoreboards, et cetera, that would be part of that package deal. We also used to charge in our AR for every little thing for groups used, which becomes a real pain to track if Chris used the scoreboard or Joe used this chair or whatever else. So for equipment-wise, if you're part of the West Bend School District community, we have left that as you get access to those pieces of equipment. It's really those outside groups who come in and typically put on large productions where we're taking chairs and tables from multiple buildings to try to bring them here. Then we also found that through the use of our facility calendar, often we can actually get more groups into our gyms by breaking our gyms apart when we divide them down versus saying, Tim has access to the entire Silverbrook gym today. Because now I have a 3-station gym over at Silverbrook. At Badger, I have a 2-station gym. The field house can break into 3 stations the way it is, and the south gym at the high school can break into 2. So we have different courts that are out there for that. Same thing then, each one of those comes with that staff charge down there, the locker room fees, the Sky Garden or upper sports spaces. That's at Badger. If you're not aware, there's a 3rd floor balcony wrestling room. They're kind of multi-purpose rooms. We cut out the use of computer labs and large groups rooms. They're all the same size to make this smaller at that point in time. And then you can kind of see how those fees break down. The one thing I do want to point out is the only place that we have included staff fees into your facility rental fee automatically is the auditorium, because we require our auditorium staff to be on site at all times our auditorium is used. Where if I am renting the practice soccer facility up at the high school, I don't need to have a grounds person there the whole time for that event in any way, shape, or form. So that is the one that does include that in there. And then you can start to see the breakdown of pricing and so forth.
Can you share that in that format? They are missing the markup. They are not seeing what you're
Oh,
saying.
okay, I can do that.
We're
I
seeing
thought that was
blank
up there.
lines in ours, where you've struck through. I'm not seeing your editing. So give
When
me a
you
second and I'll reload
download
that.
it, can you go to the one right below that, Jen?
I just did that as a PDF.
Oh,
but
no,
it's
sorry,
all
the one
good
to the
for-
right.
Yeah, I'm just, that's
What is
taking
that
me
one?
to a docs, and it's not showing me the markup. on
Okay,
that.
I will create that right now.
So, look at what they're seeing. Yeah, hang
Oh,
on,
okay.
because all those.
I did not
blank
realize
marks,
that.
That's the red line, and you're not seeing that for some reason, it's the wrong format. So one moment,
That we can do.
and we'll just ask you to refresh when he's got that set. I always like to, again, see it in context with what we currently have.
That's interesting. Mine downloaded the same way when I created it.
Yeah.
There we go.
I'm gonna delete the other two. real
Thank you.
quick so that they're-
I'll wait till you're done before I edit at that point.
Sorry.
Oops, sorry about that. I'm waiting for it to update, sorry. All right, now it will not let me edit your stuff. Here, I will email to you.
There you go.
Okay. Give me a second here. They updated that feature so you can't edit at the same time. Here, I will send it to you, Ms. Wimmer. Because it keeps thinking you're in. Oh, there we go. All right, it should be, if you refresh your screen, AR fee schedule draft, and then one towards the end of it. It should be the last one in your list.
There you go, much nicer. So, hard to see because these are still red, but.
Yeah, so these are all, as you look at it, these are your changes in your fees that you can see. So group one is the free, which is our groupings. Group two is that group, which is the West Bend School District community. And group three then is the group things that we would charge for people outside of our group, or outside of our community at that point in time. Talking about that there are staff charges that are hourly. And then, as I referenced before, if you look under the auditorium for the high school, that does include the staff fee that goes with that.
So that Silver Linings Arts Center auditorium, and that's obviously a very popular space. I
Yep.
just want to confirm the numbers, because on the other one, it came through at $1,000. I think it's, what are the numbers supposed to be in that row?
That should be, and let me just.
I think there's a
double check.
stray zero in the red
There may be
line.
a stray zero in there, so let me double check as we deleted everything out here. So for the Silver Lining Arts Center, it should be $100 for group two, and there should be $150 for group three.
Got it, okay.
Yeah. That's a stray zero completely out there.
Stray
I know.
zero.
You
No,
gave me
it's
a
It's
little
like
heart
the
attack,
hallway,
so.
Chris. It's like the hallway, which isn't even on
I was
this
about to go,
fee,
Tim?
So yeah, so I think part of that is when you talk about the use of that facility, you need some specialized staff to
Sure.
support that. And we are looking at some options with some youth apprenticeship kids in there also, but we have to have a staff member there where in some cases, we don't. Lifeguard is another one. If you rent your pool out here to an outside group, let it be a swim club, let it be, we don't do like private parties or anything like that for liability reasons, but you also have to pay the lifeguard. If you are going to use the baseball field, you're gonna pay the hour to have the baseball field prep, but you get 2 hours for the use of the baseball field at that point in time. Instead of lumping it all in there, sometimes you don't need the hours of staff time. Often when we host like softball tournaments and baseball tournaments here, we will prep the field once for the day. We don't need to stack on a whole 8-hour or 10-hour day of staffing to prep that field for them and use the facility usage at that point.
So if I could be as candid as I can in an open meeting. So in my experience, we've used the theater now for a couple of years. And I know that our theater company might be different than others. But there's certainly been time where there's value in having that staff member there, right? They've helped with mics and audio and all the stuff that I don't even know about. But there's often a lot of time where, honestly, I feel like we're wasting their time too by them sitting there. So I don't know if there's an answer to that. And two, I believe, are required to prove insurance. That's what we do, right? And
every
so
group
if an
is
inc-
required to
Yep,
that,
so
yep.
if an incident were to happen, right, we're covered by our liability. So is that, I guess what I'm getting at, is that a solution that if a entity is willing to take on that liability, do they necessarily always need to have that person there? Could they be appointed as as the responsibility contact, right? So that
I
if you
kinda-
break something in the theater, it's on you. you
Yeah,
know?
I kind of had that before in the theater where it was a dance group, and this might be something we need to explore with the different groups. So there's going to be times where you're doing run-throughs and you're using stage and you're not using all those pieces. I think we should be able to work with the group and kind of figure that out, if that's just a space and we're not pulling soundboards, lights, all that kind of stuff. Because we've certainly had that, and it's then just a kind of a rental of the large space versus I need to have all the technical. You're probably dealing with technical when, one, you have people lighting or blocking the show, and then you're probably doing your run-throughs, so there's probably just a few key times versus all the practices. So that, I think that's something that we could easily look at, because you're going to run into it
Yeah.
mostly with your kind of groups.
And you're right. It's
And
the,
who
it's the,
knows?
it's the rehearsal practices versus
Correct.
tech week, right? Tech week, yeah, please have
Yes.
that person there,
Yep.
because I don't know what I'm doing.
And I think to your point, what I have learned in my time working with our staff in there, and like Nick, who's filling in for us right now, as we redo that role and looking at having a kid also working in there with us, there are times when it is appropriate for our kid to work in there, or we even may have some of our custodial staff work in there. So that's why we just said, look, you're getting somebody as part of this. We're not charging you extra above and beyond for that, because you're right. There are times where you don't need a sound person there for that day, and they can be working on other things and so forth. So we felt it appropriate to not charge above and beyond for those purposes, because there might be times in this model, Chris, when if we do this kid route also, that it might be me running the soundboard and the kid running the lights, and I'm not going to charge you double for that either, right? I think we just want to meet the show's needs. And that's where that felt, many of those places seem to be flat fees, where everybody else would charge staff or overcharge for staff time and facility usage at that point.
So, but that aside, I think the fee you've set up is comfortable. I mean, again, I can just speak from my own experience, but I think that it's affordable enough that you're not scaring away any other groups, and we can still be that, that space for those
And I think
entities.
we've done a really good job of continuing it to the point of, I get the week of the show and all your stuff is up on the stage, we just can't push it back. But early on, using that auditorium for multiple things, this one became a weird one to track, so we thought we'll flat fee that. And then certainly, I'll give you an example. That weekend we had that dance company here. It wasn't the auditorium. They used 14 classrooms and all these different things. It wasn't the auditorium staff we were worried about. It was the other 4 custodians we had to bring every night in to clean up and all those types of things, so.
Sounds good.
If I could just make sure I'm following. So those that are in now Group 2 are typically organizations that weren't charged in the past? Would that be accurate?
Some are and some are not, depending upon their group. So a business in the West Bend School District who would come in, they maybe would have been charged, but there are other groups who come in and use our facilities, and there were no charges for prepping the fields, use of that, wear and tear, the equipment, turning the lights on, HVAC, et cetera. Those were costs that were not passed on to the user in any way, shape, or form at that point.
So the pricing was kind of based on those factors?
Yep.
I guess I mean, $10 for use of a gym, that's nothing. And granted, it's a lot of groups that are going from paying $0 for the same gym. Like my kids' baseball team has been using the Decorah gym for no charge. So I think it's appropriate to charge for those. All these organizations are doing fundraising, and if they need to do more to secure facilities, I think they should. I just wondered if it's charging enough, because are we factoring in the administrative time, booking and scheduling these and billing it and
Yep, so
all
we
of
bring
that.
some of that in there. I think there's just the cost of doing business, but you're looking at cost of lights, HVAC, some wear and tear, your plumbing usage, right? Kids are gonna go to the bathroom and all that. And then your staff time that hits both of that. So I'll give you an example for there. Like, I mean, yeah, you're going from 0 to 10. I know others, when I looked at other policies, and there's some examples in there that's a $25 to $40 an hour for one spot in the gym. We also talked about that at the last committee, we don't want to overcharge for where we're at. We don't want to say, well, you know what, your group's now going to pay $50 an hour because we can make you pay because this is the only gym we have. That's what we're not looking to do. We're making sure we're covering our costs at that point.
I was going to say, I'm comfortable with the assumption that we pay tax dollars for a reason. I don't expect it to completely subsidize these, but I'm assuming that our tax dollars are going towards the person who's helping to schedule and manage this at a high level, and really you're just passing on the building and maintenance costs to those
And I
renters.
think when I talk to some other people in my own mindset too, that group 3, many of these group 2 people are also supporting our school district, our facilities. There are theater groups who buy equipment and they leave it here year-round for us to use, or gym space. We have all these different groups who support us. There's other support besides just the rental fee at that point in time.
I think I agree with the comments here. I think none of these shock me as being terribly unaffordable, acknowledging that there could be nonprofits who paid nothing and may have to pay a little bit more. Also, I'm going to say, Joe, I echo your comments too. I think it's something to monitor going forward, because if we're charging someone, it's $10. By the time we issue an invoice for $10 to process it, we may be kind of backwards. But what I'd say is, let's monitor it going forward. I like the simplicity, and we'll learn lessons going forward. I'm assuming, depending on when 10 years go by, this probably is going to need to be changed at least once or twice just because of inflation. Who knows?
On a 3-year cycle
Yeah,
here, Mr.
well, exactly.
Flyer.
And so I was just going to say, I'm assuming that this is something that'll be monitored. And if we think, even after a year, hey, we have to change this, well, then come forward.
And I think as you look at it, you've got your $10, the gym fee, you got a staff charge of 20, I got to make sure I got the right number when I look at it here. For Monday through Friday is $25 an hour. Okay, there's your charge. We're paying from everything from meeting them at the door, because our doors still have to be secure in the evening, letting people in, cleaning up, all those types of things that go with it. We have less and less one-off groups who use our facilities. We are, like Joe, his kids practice at Decora's gym. They're in there regularly. So for us to bill, it's, I know soccer organizations that are in there, I don't know, they may rent the equivalent of 25 hours a month at our gym, or baseball or basketball or whatever else. So I think there is some pieces that go with it, because it is both a facility cost and the staff cost that go together. We just don't want to make sure we're overcharging on the staff side.
Yeah, thank you. That is good perspective. I appreciate that.
What I'd like to propose is that we actually clean up this. I think we've had some good conversation. I'd like to actually write something to our user groups and just say the board is looking at that. We're preparing to bring it forward for a first reading. Could you take a look? What questions might you have? Because we need to make sure it's really clear for that end user. And if there's any questions or feedback they would have, because we do have a slate of very consistent users. So I would say that we do that to make sure that's clear, and then put this back in for a first reading for the full board. So if that's agreeable for the group, that's how I'd like to proceed.
Any objections to that approach?
The only thing I said I would also share is the groups asked, is this one of those things, if the board passes this on Monday, August 22nd, the bill starts on the 1st, we would ask the board to make the fee in this policy effective a certain date, so we can communicate after the fact. Because I've had some people say, well, I don't know if we would go there or we'd go somewhere else now. Okay, that's your choice. We want to be proactive, that, not that I call, I'll use your group, Chris, and say, hey, by the way, this is the new fee structure for next week's show. Do you want to move now, right? So we want to be cognizant of our users. We want people to use our facilities, so.
Also, this is scheduled for automatic review as part of the series next year. So we'll automatically be revisiting this one.
Great. Other questions? Are we okay with that
I
approach?
think, yeah, the approach makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks for the work. I know this took a lot of time and energy at our request. We appreciate it. All right, we move to our next agenda item, which is the Student Transportation Services Policy 751.
Yeah, so we had talked about this. We have The conundrum right now is that we're really mixed. Specifically, your 5K and your grades 1 through 4, you have different eligibility between the 1 mile and the 1.25. So I could have an older brother or sister that doesn't get transportation and a kindergartner who does. So we talked about kind of how do we want to phase in potential cleanup, and we were talking about what is in front of us, especially with reconfiguration. So I'll go through a couple pieces because you had asked for kind of what were some of the numbers of impact. We actually don't recommend a change for next year. We recommend looking just a little bit further out, and your options are to make that 4K through kindergarten, 1.25 miles. Recall that we're going to have some of those early learning programs at our elementaries, so that family could be transported together, 4K and kindergarten, along with their older siblings. When you look at that, that actually comes with a little bit of savings to it that we have. If I'm just projecting this year's number into that, again, we'd clean up what the actual impact is because I'm not recommending any change for next year. Then recall that we're going to hold in that year our 5th graders and keep them at their elementary schools to avoid that unnecessary transition to 3 schools in 3 years. So again, we'd probably want to standardize that. I would recommend at the 1.25, and that's adding 63 students. You would think an add would incur cost. However, at that point, when we're reconfiguring, we're looking at shifting the tiers. Remember, we start a tier when I put a bus on the road. So usually you're leading with your high school kids, and then you're following with some kind of configuration of middle and elementary. Right now, I'm only running a tier and a half in that structure, and I can get us to a 3-tier model by staggering those. So that's why I'm saying I think we pause and kind of do some shifts when we align and reconfigure. That makes the most sense. We did also run what would be the impact if you took it down to the lowest mileage, 4K, and through 5th grade to be the 1 mile. We talked about that for a little bit, and that comes with significant cost as well. Again, we're a little ways out. We can look at that again in another year's time because I can't anticipate the savings with a 3-tier model. And then beyond, you're looking at 6th grade folding into that 6-12 structure. And we talked about kind of the difference developmentally with 6th grade versus, 10th grade and all of those. So I would say we don't propose any changes to this for the coming year, but then as we select the model for the boundaries for your elementaries and we forecast actual numbers, that in that next year we tighten that up and then make a decision around, do we want to hold, those different tiers and what is our recommendation? But again, we're thinking it's not necessarily a budget driver, it's an alignment for a family. It's unusual where I pick up one kid, leave the others behind. It's, you got to get one kid to a bus stop and deal with the other. It's just unusual for families. It's not insurmountable. That's why, it's something that's kind of been in practice. That's why we're saying let's pace ourselves with change and see if we can't take a bigger chunk for cleanup as we reconfigure. So that's kind of our recommendation at this point, unless the committee would like us to continue to pursue anything.
So the idea would be that if we open the attachment for the, 751, the PDF, and in it there's the yellow highlighted area which has the distances and
Correct.
that we would propose no change for this school year.
Right. I would suggest we keep this as it is for right now, and then we revisit it when we have those boundaries solidified, and I can give some closer to actual, and then I can even look farther that year out around what does the implication mean for a 3-tier busing model, because we might be able to do a little bit more cleanup.
Then the draft does have, I think it's a small language change underneath contracted transportation providers, where it struck the word, I think, including. It kind of clarified that it's 10 or more passengers in addition to the driver.
Correct.
So that, I think, is the only
The only
change that we would
shift, yep,
for
and
this
we
year.
we would communicate to the rest of the board that we're holding with that language. I would unhighlight it and talk to them about a multi-year path as we reconfigure. And I think that's kind of acceptable to the board as well. It's holding impact on families.
So just ask the other members, any issues or challenges with that approach? That is, for this year, we keep it the same, but then as we know more, as we reconfigure, that we would bring it back? That's what it sounds like in the
Yep,
future.
we'll bring back that little tweak, but hold on that
Hold on the rest.
eligibility, and then put it on our slate for next year, and then we'll have some actual numbers.
All right.
Great. Thank you.
Next, review of the 600 series for fiscal management. We
Great.
welcome Mr. Lenny Hansen, who's going to help
Yeah.
us through this, too.
Absolutely. So we work together on the 600 series. When we take a series, we go through every single policy that's there. They're all linked. They're found on our website. Below that, we start bucketing them. So if you've watched our prior committee work, we'll make some recommendations for removal. Revision, we've been cleaning up our format, kind of, as you do policy for over 50 years, you have some style consistency that we're cleaning up. So our naming convention, using school board, using certain specific formats, and we'll talk about, there's still some bullets sitting in one, and just get your input on that. So you can see those for style. Then there's a slate where we don't recommend any change. They're up to date. And then there's some to dig into and discuss for revision. So I'd like to kind of take them by buckets, and they're added in there. So if you click the for removal, the 610 seemed to lend itself to kind of overall goals. It's very brief. I thought, if we wanted to fold in an overall goal statement, perhaps we could put that in 620, like access to those pieces. So, if you read that and look at that, is there anything that you want to convey? I think it lends itself. In 620, you're really looking at the annual budget and how you develop those things. Is that more appropriate in there? Or you might say hold. That was just kind of where my head was. I was looking at such a brief policy that just seemed to have a goal statement. So eager for your thoughts on that.
I guess I was curious, is there a 3-year financial projection? Is that something that is maintained on an ongoing basis? I mean, that's what it's referring to.
You want to speak to what you're cleaning up on that?
Sure. So we do look at 3-year financial projection. We can project, state aid and all those various pieces. You can put in, projections around inflation of various, things like utilities are going to inflate at a different rate than labor costs or healthcare and so forth. What's always tricky for a school district is that the state budget really determines our revenues, right? And that's determined on a 2-year basis. But we are looking on definitely a 1, 2, 3-year basis. But the further out you go, obviously, the more unknowns that it creates.
Yeah, I'm familiar with financial projections. I create and maintain those myself, and I don't know there really needs to be in a policy. I think it's a good practice, but I see the challenges with your funding sources and kind of uncertainty. I was curious if you had gone as far as past the schools closing and what things look like.
Oh, yeah.
Beyond there.
We even look out to the 5 years, but it's that muddy waters for crystal balls on that one, especially when we're going to go into, sometimes there's significant delay with that state budget, so we're just projecting conservatively. So I think we could look kind of to the future, like you said, what's that practice? And I think some of the work that Lenny's bringing forward to the board is his vision for what some of those reports look like at the board level, so that'll be exciting too. But we just didn't see those pieces. The other one too, and there's so much for us that's either situated in policy or we follow GASB's accounting practices that's situated in our requirements. We're fully audited. So these were just our thoughts on ones. Did we really need those?
This doesn't look, this is a WASB recommended mandatory policy?
No, none of these are recommended or mandated by WASB.
Okay.
My question was later on in, where am I? Page 13 of our packet for the series of changes attachment.
The ones with changes?
I'm sorry, yes, 600 series with changes,
Sure.
page 13. There's a lot scratched off when it comes to emergency expenses. So did you put that somewhere else?
Yes, so do you want to go through the removal ones and clear that packet? Are we all good with
I'm
those
sorry.
being removed?
That's all right.
Or,
Yeah, why don't we just?
we've got
We can go
three
down the
to
line.
consider for
That's all right.
removal.
Yeah, why don't we do that? So the one with regard to the federal grant during extraordinary circumstances, that
Correct.
seems to be very limited in scope. Is that something that we encounter regularly? That situation?
So that policy didn't even exist as any kind of template pre-pandemic.
Right.
It was created in case districts wanted to add that during the pandemic, but we feel that the authority granted under other policy and statute covers that.
Applies.
Yeah.
And
Great.
the other around the audit is in statute. So sometimes we try and avoid
Yeah.
things that are in statute so that we're just in alignment with
Yeah,
statute.
so if the
Promise not to
statute,
break the rules.
otherwise if the statute changes, we have to scramble and change the policy.
Yeah.
I don't have problems with
Removal?
considering removal of these.
I think it makes sense as well.
Okay,
Great.
see what the board thinks, all right? And then, Chris, you had talked about one, I'm trying to think, whatever the bucket is.
The easiest ones
Mine's at the
are-
end.
Yeah,
Okay.
the easiest ones were revised for the format alignment.
Okay.
And I've
Oh,
got those
let's
in
do that one.
order. So if you follow along at the bottom, I've got them right in order and your buckets were in order.
Okay.
So if you look at that next one, which is revised for format alignment, in 657, we've had a mix of like bullets, letters, numbers, some Roman numerals, all that. So our convention has been, we lead with numbers and then go into letters right after. So we were cleaning up in 657. B is actually, that should have been part of A, subsection A, and then, so I'm bringing that sentence up in there and following that one A and those conventions. So that just belongs up in that first one. So it's just shifting a sentence up.
And then C would become B.
Correct, correct. The next one is the same thing where it,
I think the next one that was here is
661?
yep. So looking at that, it had a mix of bullets and numbers, so shifting those bullets to lowercase. So again, I'm replicating that 1A, 1B, easier to reference when you're in discussion with those things as well.
Okay,
Then 662.1, same thing, shifting from bullets to a number. We got a little thrown and we started throwing this around, so riddle us this. Some, when they're not a complete sentence, we're like, well, should they be bullets? But we thought it was just easier to talk. So there was one we were looking at, it still has bullets. It's like, give us some direction. What would you like as board? I'm fine with converting them to numbers versus bullets. It seems like it lends itself to conversation.
yeah, I could go either way. It is nice sometimes because if you have a string of 3 or 4 bullets and you say, well, I'm talking about the third, no, the second bullet, it's nice to say it's number 2.
Right.
So I think it anchors it a little bit better,
Right.
but.
There's one more that I still had the bullets because I'm like, is this a bullet? Why? I wasn't sure. So we'll get to that. And then 690, we decided that all references to the board should be school board to avoid any confusion on that.
Okay, any questions or concerns?
Nope.
Fellow members on those? Okay. So we're not changing the text of the content,
No
it's the
intent,
formatting.
Just cleaning up some of the formatting pieces on that.
All right.
Then the next bucket are the no change bucket. And those, again, they seem to have format alignment. I think, is this the one that had I think there was a different one in one that we have change in there. This has got a couple bullets on 652, so I would just switch that into the format bucket, just to make sure I'm getting rid of all those buckets. But if you look at these, they're up to date. They reflect our practice, and they've been in use without question. So in this kind of bucket where we don't recommend any change, we would still bring it to the board to do a reading and then update its date of review so it stays on cycle as a series. So if there's any that you would like to discuss, we're happy to, but again, we've gone through and don't have any recommendations for change. Again, those couple where we were just talking about bullets, when do they, when don't they, I'll go ahead and convert those to letters and shift them into that format bucket, but no changes to content here.
Okay, any concerns with that bucket, the no change bucket? And we'll have opportunity, this will go to the full board and such,
Absolutely.
so. Okay,
All right, now, Chris, here's your favorite one.
Okay.
We'll go through each one because we are recommending changes and we'll want to discuss each set of changes. So that first one for recommendations for revisions is 620, your annual operating budget. As I was talking about, do we want to nest in here something that talks about, in addition to our annual, we do a 3-year? If you wanted some language, we could certainly fold that in. But I think we're good. In this one, we have a recommendation for removal. This was in alignment with actually WASB's. They don't have this language that is shown in strike-through in their updates. So we're just conforming and making that recommendation to stay in alignment. And again, just a reminder that generally school districts use one of two services. You're using the Wisconsin Association of School Boards that comes with their legal team and their templates and recommendations, or Neola, which is a subscription service as well.
So say it again, you're saying WASB does
So
not want
WASB
us
does
to
not
have
have this language in their recommendation.
about having a balanced budget?
Correct, they do not. So I'm calling that to your attention, but I'm also saying if you want to have something to that effect or other goal statements, this might be the spot for it. So it's for your discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is, I think the school board would generally strive to maintain a balanced budget. I'm only speculating that what WASB would say is, well, is it a policy if you say I'm going to strive to do something, if you know what I'm saying? Sometimes policies are a bit more must do this, must do that. I guess I could go either way on this. It's nice sometimes to be more aligned to the WASB format, because then they monitor it for us in case something has changed. Any
Yes.
initial thoughts?
Lenny, can you describe a scenario where we would purposefully not pass a balanced budget?
Well, I could describe scenarios. I think the part of the reason this isn't in the WASB language is definition of balanced budget in terms of you have various funds you use, right? So you may use Fund 46 in a given year to pay for certain facility upgrades, right? So your Fund 10 is the one when we think balanced budget that you're thinking that's got to be balanced. That's our general fund. But if you use some Fund 46 funds, theoretically, you might say Fund 46 is not balanced that year because you're expensing some of those funds because you've saved them up for the purpose of capital improvements, right? So my guess is that's why it's not in WASB language, because balanced budget by which fund, by, right? So Fund 73, the OPEB trust. Well, as certain OPEB programs phase down, we're expensing funds that were allocated for that, but there's no future liability. But theoretically, you have a lower balance from one year to the next because you're expensing it. So my guess is that's why WASB doesn't have it in there. That's my assumption.
No, there's, that does make some sense, because I think as we've been talking about this year, sometimes it looks like our budget is overdrawn, but the reality is, no, we had the money raised in prior years in the funds, and so that does make some sense.
And you may allocate funds 1 year in, you allocate funds maybe from 1 year to the next in different ways to best take advantage of the state aid formula for the benefit of the taxpayer. So some years you might say, oh, we have a slate of funds that we're going to hold that in Fund 73 for a future year use, or Fund 46, right? Because perhaps putting it at there benefits the taxpayer in the following year's state aid better. Other years, you might say we're going to hold that in Fund 10 as an additional reserve, but that's for the plan of maybe expensing that the following year, right? You make a lot of those decisions based on, so if you're running a surplus 1 year, or you underspend by a small amount, right? You make those decisions often on what is going to benefit the taxpayer the most in terms of the following year's state aid formula. I guess that's the other potential scenario where, you might say, well, we placed money there with the intent to expense it the following year.
I think what we could do, because, you're talking about the board's intention to, work within our means to develop a balanced budget, but it's not clear, and sometimes it doesn't work that way. What we could do is, we also get legal consult with WASB as our service and say, this is kind of where we're trying to convey our intent, to be stewards of taxpayers' dollars, and can you help us craft something that would do that in a way? Because they'll look at this and say exactly, you shouldn't be saying it that way, but is there something where they could help us give an overarching about our kind of fiscal responsibility and our intent to do that. And they might be able to help craft something, make a recommendation one way or the other, and we can bring that to the board as part of that discussion. Hey, we went round on this one because it does and doesn't fit in how our budgets work, but here's our intent, and here's some potential language. We could bring that to discussion for that, or we can hold it back here in committee too.
I don't know that it hurts to get WASB's
Yeah.
thoughts on it.
Because I think that, I hear what you're saying, you know, on like, well, do you lose your intent on that? But I think we need to clean up that language.
And I know we revisit this obviously pretty often, but while I trust this board, right, my concern is giving free reins to to a future board. And I know that's not our intention here, but if we completely remove everything here, I mean, it was just say they wouldn't, right? When we might be making sound fiscal policies today, but it doesn't mean that they will in the future.
Chris has there's always that one-liner, I'm not creating policy for right now in good times. I'm creating them for unknown times ahead. That could be different. So why don't I get that, and if I get a sentence or so, I'll highlight that and bring that back, and we can
Sure.
bring it for first reading for the entire team to discuss, but that way we've got something ready to go with.
And
We're
maybe
going to
avoid-
talk about shortly a policy that relates to that, which is, I think, where WASB would point you, which is the fund balance policy.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's where you're really preserving the, financial sustainability and health of the district in that fund balance. That's my assumption as to why they don't have something here, but instead they recommend you get into that fund balance policy, which we'll look at in a few minutes.
Yeah, I like the approach, and I was just gonna say, I had the same thought with the word strive, well, that's an odd word to have in a policy. So, yeah, maybe as long as the language doesn't include that word. But yeah, I see what Mr. Jenkins is saying as well. It doesn't, feel great to say, oh, well, no, we don't care about balanced budgets anymore. So, yeah, I think something in lieu of that might be beneficial to add.
Perfect.
Great.
I'll get an opinion on that, and maybe some opportunity for us to discuss with the full board. Any other thoughts on 620?
Right. None. I think we can move to the next.
Great. 656 has a mix of kind of cleanup on school board, shifting superintendent versus district administrator. Those are just some alignment pieces. And then a substantial add around a sample that WASB provided with regards to fees. So I'll take a moment to kind of process that.
Yeah, so I'd read this before, and my question was, can we withhold school services? I mean, that's a legal thing to do if they don't pay certain fees?
So not services, it talks about privileges, and there's very specific ones that this can impact. So again, this language came straight from WASB,
Yep.
so, there's certain things that are not eligible at all for something like that. I think the intent with adding the more detailed language that WASB has in this is to narrow actually what collection of those fees could impact.
Or you can choose to not have that language in there and take it directly to small claims or those pieces. So we're not impacting any of those, but we're recouping our costs. We have thousands and thousands of dollars and some unpaid fees
Yeah.
that can persist. So you can take that however you would like.
Well, what I like about the wording here is that it starts with the proposition that I believe it is the administration will hold or attempt to arrange an in-person meeting and make a good faith effort. So in other words, we're not going to jump straight to court. We're going to try.
And we have
And then-
long-term payment plans, and then we help work with families because you can use and apply. Perhaps they qualify for a free or reduced lunch, and then they can sign off where I can apply that status to other fees. And then we'll certainly help with other, if it came with sports or other pieces. So, to your point, and we'll have families that'll have a long-term payment plan, and as long as, I've had families who, in my former district, they paid $1 a week, as long as we've got a plan and we're making progress, we're not here to punish people. We're here to help you work through that, and we're here to help make it so the kids can access all the all the things with school. So we usually help through getting qualification for free or reduced lunch in many cases first, and then set up some longer-term payment plans with families. That's your optimal approach, but sometimes it's not there. Sometimes you need to pursue some court action.
I think that's a good approach. Payment plans are great as long as, they're showing good faith effort. I guess or perhaps prior to a court proceedings, I don't even know if school districts do this. Is use of collection agencies a possibility?
Yeah. I did that in my last district. We went to collections first.
Okay.
You're limited in what you can take to collections as a
Mm-hmm.
government agency, but if we can, we do.
Oh, okay.
You're automatically giving, you're kind of carving off some of it.
Yep.
But
Yeah, they get their fee.
some is better than nothing.
Right.
In many cases, but that was generally our path.
But so back on my question, can you give an example of school-related privileges that would get taken away or withheld?
Like participation in sports or?
Oh, sure.
So perhaps if you're graduating, getting the tickets for others to attend graduation might be a privilege. Not that we
You
don't,
can
we don't,
attend your
yeah, you can
graduation,
attend your
but you don't get all your
graduation.
extras.
Right.
And again, you can choose to strike anything like that, and then we take it right to some kind of collections after.
No, I think the policy is fine, and I think you're covered by saying, the precursor to the extent permitted by law, right? So
Yeah.
we're already kind of protected, if anybody wanted to challenge us anyway.
Well, I'm also,
Well, yeah, and like I said, our intent is not to punish kids
Yep.
in any of that. They still, are going to get to do those things. Back in the day, you'd hear scary stories of people would be telling kids, well, I'm going to withhold your diploma. No, I have no right to do that. So no, you can't do things like that.
Yep.
any other questions on that? All right. On to the next one, which I believe is, do I have this right?
60.
660.
Financial management and internal controls. This was one of those bullets, like, do I bullet this? Do I not? It's kind of the middle of a sentence. If you're okay, then I'll just clean that up and make them numbered, just for ease and discussion. And you can see, looking at one for a potential strike through, it is not in sample language, and it feels like a duplicate of the last bullet, where they're both speaking to compliance.
Okay.
Okay?
Questions, concerns?
Then on that.
Seeing any.
Yep, there's a little bit more on that second page, where there was legit a duplicate of the same statement. So we're cleaning that up and pushing that up into there, getting rid of that duplicate, and then removal of some pieces at the end there.
So that number 6, governmental fund type shall recognize revenues in the modified accrual. I'm assuming that's part of the standard GASB practice. Is that the idea?
Yep, so number 4 really relates back to that and just kind of simplifies it. And that's what the WASB recommended language is. It
I
basically
see.
encompasses it.
So we're removing
I see.
5 because it's a duplicate, and number 6 gets replaced with number 4.
Thank you. Any questions on that recommendation? All right, hearing none. Why don't we move then to fund balance, 662.3?
In that, we are recommending that we extend that and grow that to 10 to 18%, given our financial position.
What are we at right now?
10 to 15, and then our fund balance itself is sitting at, yeah, we're over that already, so we'd like to
15.9.
extend it.
Would we just want to go to 15 to 20? I mean, are we going to be bumping up against this again? Or is this some sort of standard? Is this a WASB recommendation or anything?
Oh, you could go to 10 to 20. I would leave it a little, if I'm right at the line at 15.9, I'd give myself a little cushion
On
backwards.
the backside?
Yep.
So you have to remember, as expenses, just inflationary expenses change from one year to another, that's going to, if you don't contribute anymore, right, you will slowly erode that. So you want to keep a range at least to be able to comfortably stay within.
And WASB's recommend starting point is at 10. But we're not opposed to growing that, and saying 10 to 20.
Yeah, let's set our goals really high.
There you go.
I'm proud of 20.
Perfect.
Yeah, I would imagine that if we said our goal is 20, it would be, well, you're maybe hanging on to too much money, so to speak. You're leaving it in the coffers. But 10 to 18 seems like it's fine.
Did you want to talk about my last district?
Yeah, I mean,
We were at
there's districts out
50%.
there that, you know, often some of your smaller ones, but they'll
Yeah.
hit substantially larger, you know, and I think that is a scale thing, right? So the larger the district, maybe the more you tend to see a little bit smaller balance, but the small ones, you know, need to create a reserve as well for,
You also might be strategically cushioning for a blow.
Sure.
And leading into, so if I were leading into a referendum year and I've got, you know, failing mechanicals and those things, I might bolster that in case of. So if something failed, I had that at the ready.
And
So
for-
there might be reasons why you bolster it and should be part of your long-term
And for our
financial plan.
bond rating as well, right? They're going to want to see a significant amount of fund
Right.
balance reserve.
Yeah,
fund balance impacted the district's bond rating positively.
yeah.
Yep.
No, I have no problem with this, or 10 to 20, anything like that.
Great.
Good. All right.
The next one I'll let Lenny speak to, 665, you can see the old language. There's a couple sentences that stay, but he is recommending a total shift to WASB's sample policy language that you see in green there, and then removal of our old language. So after kind of review, so I'll let you dissect that, and then he can
Yep,
speak to
so-
that recommendation.
If you look at those strike-throughs, which are, I guess, kind of hard to read because they're struck through, but they're much more broad in terms of just have good controls, have good practices. And what the new WASB language really gets into is, okay, well, how do we group those into buckets? As you can see, internal controls, fraud, reporting, those sorts of things. Whistleblower, which was not covered under the prior policy in that amount of detail. It really just creates greater buckets, so it really expands on those controls, which we are in compliance with all of the new language anyways, as we currently are. So, as you said, you know, thinking about future boards and things like that, it's the kind of policy you put in place for the future, even though we're already in compliance with it.
Yeah, proposed language is definitely more specific. I like that. Others' thoughts? Any concerns? I think we can advance that one.
Great. 672, there's a couple pieces, just for those new to policy. You have your policy, then you'll have your AR, which is an administrative rule, also a piece executed with board. Then you can have exhibits, which are samples. They're often forms or things that are used. So when we looked at this, there seemed to be a lot of kind of procedural pieces that you could nest in an AR, a procedural manual, or those things. We don't want them to go away, but they need to be probably expanded on and nested in another piece. So leaving the policy language to that kind of broad set, and then diving in a little bit deeper on all the procedural pieces. That's kind of where we were when we were looking at this piece. So eager for discussion from the group.
Yeah, there's a lot of picayune detail in the parts that are, I'm going to say struck, but I don't mean that because we're talking about moving it.
Correct.
So that the
And even
policies,
an expansion on, like, what does that look like? What does it, you know, maybe giving some examples, and how do you attend to this procedurally?
yeah, so this would keep the policy as kind of the overarching philosophy and then move to the AR, the specifics.
You can move to an AR, or we were talking about a procedural manual as well.
Sure.
So there's certain other controls that we actually abide by now in terms of, okay, at which level does an expense rise to the level that we need sealed bids or a minimum of certain number of quotes or just competitive bids and so forth. We abide by some of that currently, but it's not in policy. That would be in a manual. So, you know, those are whereas this approach, as it's written, is kind of a backwards approach of, here's all your exceptions, right? So outside of the exceptions, there's no other guidance
Not
given.
seeing it nested.
Yeah.
Definitely agree with taking the procedural aspects out. I've gone through that process before.
So you're saying we already have somewhat of a, flow chart of this person's authorized to spend up to this amount and blah, blah, blah. So where does that live right now?
I mean, the basic policy really says if it's, within the budget, the district has, and it's been that way for many years since before I came to the district, that if it's within the budget, the administration has pretty broad permission to spend. And that's where we feel there's opportunity for
Clean up.
keeping some constraints that apply regardless of whether it's in the approved budget or not. But yeah, right now, the board is, through the approval of a budget, delegating the rest of expenditures to really superintendent or the business office.
Yeah, I think of, and I just pulled up my village's own one, right? We have a purchase policy table. So you're saying we don't currently have anything like that? It's just kind of freewheeling?
Not in that format. That's what we're saying. There's an opportunity to clean that up and, like you said, give some overall and then nest, and here's how that looks like when it functions.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sounds good.
Awesome. 683 then is looking at asset management. Just a recommendation to update from that $5,000 to $10,000 to align with the federally used threshold. It's also WASB recommended. And then shifting those bullets in that.
Do we currently have any sort of tracking mechanism for purchases under, I guess, the $5,000 current limit, or would we under the $10,000?
When you say tracking, I guess. can you
Like, we
define it for me?
purchased a, $2,500 computer or whatever it might be. It doesn't, it wouldn't be capitalized as a capital asset, so, once it's
I mean, what
expensed.
our asset value, like our inventory?
Or do you mean like,
Value
Is
is,
there just
or-
is there any, are they tagged?
Sure.
Is there, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I could buy a novel, right, for $5, and I'm inventorying that. So I have multiple inventory systems.
Okay.
My teacher manuals, all those pieces. We are beefing up our elementary inventory right now and kind of getting those all barcoded in, despite their value, just tagging what that looks like. We also are working to standardize, every third grade classroom has X in it, not just kind of, like you said, that larger asset tagging that we're all used to, where a company comes in and kind of does that broad thing. But yeah, we are tagging pieces of minimal value so that we've got standardization in what we have and monitoring, so that we're not purchasing duplicates in a system, that kind of thing.
If you're looking for that kind of inventorying, Mr. Harder is your hero. So they
Everything?
tag every cord. It is all tagged.
Yep.
So, yeah,
They do.
there is no shortage of inventory management on the facilities and technology side. And then, yeah,
Curricular
curriculum
side,
has,
yeah.
I mean, when I think back to where I arrived in the district 10 years ago to where we are now, I mean, we're tagging every book that comes in. That was not the case over a decade ago when I got here.
Yeah, I ask because, at some organizations, that sort of process is just maintained within the capital, the fixed asset ledger. So if it didn't rise to meet that capitalization threshold, you expense the item and then kind of,
Where does it go?
it could walk away and, maybe someone to remember, but maybe not.
Trust me, you'll get,
not a
you'll get your
problem.
you'll get your little list at the end of the year, and it'll say, "Where's this cord? Where's this book? Where's that?"
Well, and if a
Because-
teacher
tracking.
moves buildings, they know exactly which pieces of technology are attached to that classroom versus the teacher, which move where. I mean, it creates transition, it makes transition a much smoother process when people move
Not
grades.
just moving, so annually, all staff must check out with their administrator. And you have to prove and show some of those pieces. So you're showing at checkout time, and everyone has to do that. There's a different procedure if they're leaving or transitioning to somewhere else, but all staff must check out with that administrator and prove those things, verification of fobs, keys, like everything is then tracked that way too.
So then with this policy, basically what would be changing is if something is between $5,000 and $10,000, it would go to expense. If it's above 10,000, it would be capitalized and depreciated.
Correct.
Yep.
Good discussion. Concerns, other questions? All right.
Great. So a little homework on some of those changes. I'll get some of that sample language. We'll bring those forward to our board. The next is Policy 119. This is around the high school configuration. Thank you. And we took this conversation out of committee and took it to the whole board. I've synthesized kind of some key takeaways and what the board wanted to see next steps, and that was certainly revisiting the policy. Our biggest piece is around the language itself. We were fleshing out what do we want to see as we analyze that question, but we were really gauging interest around I'm held to a timeline and I'm held to a non-binding referendum in the current policy. And we talked about potential to shift or remove those items. So you've got kind of those pieces. We talked about surveying people as part of the process. We also talked about the data that the board would want to see as part of, because when we put that question out there, we kind of start that clock for a conversation, and the board was very interested in making sure they had all the pieces to determine is pursuit of the question even worthy. So we kind of talked about that as a piece. But again, part of it was to look at the pieces of the policy related to timeline, task force that was specific versus wider community engagement, and really for us to sift through the board's feedback. So I leave that to you, and I'll take notes.
Well, you know that I'm very passionate about this. I do not think it is a big deal anymore to talk about reconfiguring the high schools. So the level of work that this, takes, just to put the question forward, right, I would get rid of a lot of this. I'm sensitive that there might be some of the community that still would want to be a part of that conversation, but it's nowhere near as contentious as it maybe once was, so.
I agree with that. Largely is, when is this coming forward? When are you getting this done? When are you doing it? It came up during facilities, and there's a different readiness for the question that I think there was, but I think we still want to do our due diligence on that data piece. But I don't think that there's an expectation that it go through a referendum and incur those costs and those pieces, or sit and wait on the sidelines for this kind of timeline. I think we demonstrated that we had a robust engagement process with the referendum. We could set some standards like that, but first, that I like the idea of first the full exploration of all that data with the board, and then the board determines, is this moving then out to the community? And should we construct a survey internally? Should we construct a survey? I think those are board discussions along the way. I don't think they needed to be codified in policy either.
If this policy, let's just think hypothetically, if this policy did not exist, but we were encountering this question, I mean, I think of the approach like what you've and we have outlined around we're studying data, we're going to talk to people, we're going to get input, and we're going to make a decision. When I think about it in that sense, and I think similarly to how Chris is viewing it, I kind of start with step 4 and say, or step 3, around the non-binding referendum at the next gubernatorial presidential election. We probably wouldn't do that normally. The task force recommendation, I think, to me, it sounds like we just need to talk about how we get public input, a good amount of public input. And we might use that approach, we might not use that approach.
I find in this structure, I find it maybe limiting. I think we demonstrated in the referendum that there's a wide array of people in the community and in our schools that have opinions and how to get that instead of isolating to a task force on that. I think that whether or not you put that in policy, I say we take what the board has kind of given as a directive around the expectation to explore the question, set that up with its own timeline and its own process, and the board approves those pieces and takes action along the way. So first you're approving, all right, great, this is what I'm going to bring you for you to explore this question. And I've asked those pieces, I would solidify that. Here's the timeline in which we would do that. And then great, after that, What have you heard? What would you like a next step to be? Do we want to go to a survey internally first? Do we want to look at and go out for an external survey like we did with the referendum in the community to analyze a wider set of data? Do we want, and those, I think, should have ongoing board action associated with them, kind of all along those steps too.
Yeah, I mean, I personally agree with that approach, and maybe there are different ways to tackle this, but would the board consider merely suspending this policy with the idea of saying, we are going to develop a process that's unique? I am often a fan of, let's set up these policies like we were just talking about before for the future, because you never know what the future brings. At the same time, this is a policy, I think, that was constructed during a different era when there were different questions and concerns in the community, and things have changed. But the reason that I would feel more comfortable about potentially suspending this policy but coming up with a process very specific to this is because we're not in a tremendous hurry necessarily to do it. It's not like we're trying to push this through as a board. Instead, I think we can come up with a very planned, tailored approach that's acceptable to the community that doesn't necessarily need to follow exactly this process step by step. I think what this policy does tell us is there was a time and there were people who were very, very interested in the outcome, and so wanted to think through a process that maybe would have been appropriate at that time. I think now if we set up our own process now that's thoughtful and guided, that we don't necessarily, this isn't a policy necessarily that we should follow by the letter of the law. Times and circumstances have changed. We'll come up with a process that makes sense for the here and now.
I think the accountability that this board holds itself to, that is in the spirit of this policy, is engagement. And that would be a cornerstone of the process for this board, that they expect engagement with the students, the staff, the families, and the wider community on a topic. And I think that, to your point, the suspension and the development of what is this process, we bring that forward. We have enough to draft kind of that process piece to bring that forward to the board. So I think you have readiness to perhaps discuss suspension with a potential, and our team can draft something right now, and we can bring that forward for input as around, this is the process, because we got your input on what was the data, what were those pieces. If we flesh that out, what's the intersection of surveys, what's the intersection of this, and then really got into, this is the process we want to follow, and then, like I said, you would have probably, that public support as well as kind of the board being comfortable with, like, I am comfortable that there is a solid process that hits all these pieces for me as a board member. I think that we can develop that.
Other thoughts?
However we do it, I'm fine with removing the non-binding referendum requirement. I think that makes sense to, not force ourselves to go through that process, particularly since it would be non-binding. And then, whether it's a task force or surveys, I think getting community input in other ways would be beneficial, and, just encourage us to find multiple ways to do that. So it's not all electronic or something like that.
Right.
So, go ahead, Chris, I'm
I
sorry.
was just going to echo your statements that, I was going to mention the same thing, that I don't know if we really need this policy. I would probably just axe it, mainly because leaders lead. We were elected for a reason. We can pull up our big boy pants and make decisions, right, with the data and information that we have. And at the same time, Jen, you and I have talked a lot about strategic planning, right? And I'm sure when we go through that process, one of our strategic priorities will be collaboration and getting feedback and things like that. So I know that this body is going to stick to that, right, and get that feedback. It doesn't necessarily need to be written down in a policy that we have to stick to all in a row.
And I think we set up that construct, like you said, we're confident in that ability to do the work, and we set up that construct and that expectation so that beyond us or beyond other topics, that is kind of the expectation we hold of ourselves and future boards around, this is how we step through any big decision, right? Not just the high school one, but, as we look at boundaries, as we look at that, we've been very clear and hold high regard for engagement.
Well, I'm comfortable too. I think the spirit of this was that it not be a hasty decision and it be one where the community is well informed. And I think We've learned a lot over the years, and this has become more of a standard part of board practice. So I like the idea, and again, the board will need to weigh in on this, but I like the idea of administration proposing, well, this is the general plan, and if we're comfortable with that, I agree with Chris, then we don't necessarily need this, we have that plan, and we anchor to that plan.
Great. I think what I would do is, most likely not at that next board meeting, just because that's a pretty quick turnaround for Monday, but put this one on the following board meeting where we bring a draft of that potential plan, because we've had multiple conversations now around that. I think we've got enough pieces to put together a draft plan that the board could respond to and think about.
Is it appropriate for the Monday meeting to, as part perhaps of the policy committee update, to say,
Absolutely.
this will be coming? So we'll give a verbal update, but as it relates to actually seeing the plan, we'll give
Absolutely.
administration thoughtful time to
Absolutely. I
develop
can even
it.
put this as a discussion and just say, here's our intention, so that there's space for, as if they've thought about things. I can put these notes in front of them. This is what you said prior. Is there anything else to add as we ready for that next meeting? I think I would just leave this as a standalone discussion item. So we do that.
I think that's a good idea.
Great.
All right. We look forward to the board's discussion on this.
I've got direction. The next one is just Act 20 literacy policy. I just want to give you an update. This is the stuff to sift through around Act 20. You've heard of Act 20, is some pieces around literacy, its instruction, and its practice. And so we've approved kind of that CKLA as our program that meets those tenets. And then you'll be looking at formally acting on the 5th grade, so getting that full elementary program aligned. In this Act 20, part of that statutory requirement is to put a policy in place that attends to students who are not progressing, specifically looking at retention, in 3rd grade promotion they would look at, and what are you not meeting, and what are the exceptions, and what are the how are you screening, how are you intervening, how are you supporting kids. So there's a lot to unpack. Heather Isaacson out of the curriculum department has been convening literacy specialists, administrators, et cetera, to look at and talk through our current practice and what that would look like, so that we can frame some language. So knowing that work is going on, and we've got multiple kind of templates and legal pieces to do, I would say we won't be ready at that next meeting, but at the following meeting, I'd bring some draft language because it kind of intersects with curriculum policy. Everyone is impacted, so I'd like to bring that just right to that table for discussion on a first draft.
You're saying this would come to the board?
This would come to the full board because of that, like I said, that wide intersection with everyone. I just would bring that draft straight to them to discuss because
So-
of the curriculum, policy, everything implication.
So it's a way really of using the board as a committee as a whole?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've got that space to do that in our format, so I would bring that way. And I might even, I'll check in, I have a meeting with Heather tomorrow, I'll see where that lies. If I've got something tangible to bring forward right in Monday for that discussion, I'll let them know that we just forwarded that right to the full board.
Questions, concerns? Yeah, it's one of those things that spans multiple things.
Yeah,
It's a hodgepodge of.
And when you talk about concerns, the one thing is anytime you're talking about a policy that dictates, when kids are retained and not going on to 4th grade, there are concerns there. So you're working through what are all the procedural pieces we have in place to support kids, give them the intervention, the instruction that they deserve, so they're not faced in that. And then what are the exceptions? So we're working through, there are a significant number of exceptions. If a student has a disability and has an individualized education program, if they're showing progress in their intervention, how do you convene a team around that? So those are some of the pieces, because you want some procedural safeguards and not just drawing a line in the sand.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Yeah.
Is there any funding that is related to this? So like, let's say our, scores are not meeting criteria that the state sets. Are they going to punish us fiscally or?
So this is one of those, okay. So we would nicely call this an unfunded mandate.
Yep. Yeah, my favorite
There was
word.
a bucket of funds that the state had projected for you because you were forced to pick off a list and pick a curriculum and an instruction piece. We're filing for those funds. However, we're told not to count on any of those on that expenditure. So you've got kind of the
Press.
yeah, don't count on it. And then, no, there are no additional funds. One of our kind of advocacy efforts have been around even just the significant underfunding of special education. It's hitting around, it's dropped below, sometimes less than 30%, like a 0.28, in some of supporting those costs. And you can see advocacy efforts around the state to restore even a 2/3 funding, which was originally a promise around that. But whether or not that has legs in the last round of advocacy, that didn't go anywhere. But that would significantly help, because what happens is when you're investing in all that, you're pulling from every bucket to make that happen. So no, there is no,
I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be penalized, right?
you would be penalized,
results
yep,
of-
you would be penalized in a couple ways, in that you, per this act, have to have a policy in place and follow a practice. But with that, there's no policy jail. But what it is we are required to demonstrate that our curriculum that we selected was off that list. You are required to have done that. We've cleared that. So we've not positioned ourselves to be out of compliance, that would put us in harm's way or create a liability for us.
Just following up on the question, to our knowledge, are there performance hurdles that, hey, district, you have hypothetically 30% of your kids qualify in they need to be held back, and so we are also going to hold funds away from you. We're going to alter the school funding formula. We're going to.
So there's pieces around who you identify for those extra supports and interventions. We are positioned that we have robust intervention staffing, but to your point, part of the curriculum end of it, when you look at and have, a grade level where you have that much, then there's a problem with your instruction, your materials, your instructional practices, all of those. You gotta follow that upriver and take care of it. So those are the pieces that are in play right now. It was interesting because there's a state mandated assessment, and there's a piece where we're not teaching letter sound in alignment with when that test is given. So we had a whole bunch of kids get identified out of this dictated window, and it's like, okay, we have to shift this up here in response to this so that I'm not having false identification either. So there's a reorganization around some of that instruction to take care of that. But then also, once you clean up that and you do have a set of students that are struggling, we've been tightening up what are the interventions, how do we assess and get better diagnostic tools in the hands of our teachers so their time and efforts into remediation are well spent, they're very targeted on that. Sometimes we throw a big bucket of help on there, and we can't really winnow out what that issue is, so we're refining the assessment and diagnostic piece, and then we've also refined what is the array of interventions that I have, so building their toolkit. So I feel like we're really well poised and have done a lot of really good work over the last couple of years to be ready for that, and that we still protect and have preserved our staff in place for that. We have intervention occurring at all of our campuses.
Great. Well, we'll be eager to learn more.
Yeah, perfect. I'll probably have some kind of draft or a little bit of a skeleton after my meeting this week to see where that group is at. And I'll do that.
Any other questions on the Act 20 literacy policy? All right, well then, that takes us to the end of our planned agenda, and so I just ask Superintendent Wimmer, anything else to come before this committee?
No,
All right, I think we talked about our action items and our plan for next step. Committee members, any objections to adjourning?
So moved.
All right. And we didn't even need a motion or a second on it, so that's perfect, though.
You got it.
I love it. We got it. All right, we are adjourned.